It's an honor to have Miss Aileen Bouclé in our FMRI research, FMRI webinar series. Miss Aileen Bouclé is the Executive Director for the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization. Since joining the agency in 2016, she has been leading the charge along with the Miami-Dade governing board to provide mobility choices for Miami-Dade County through the local transportation planning process and more. Specifically, the strategic Miami area rapid transit is called SMART plan, and Ms. Bouclé has a major role. Ms. Bouclé serves on the underlying board of directors at the National Association of Regional Councils, Executive Director Councils representing at-large open seat. She holds a Master of Science in Environmental and Urban Systems with a specialty in transportation planning and Bachelor of Business Administration, Florida International University. And I would like to thank the FAU IT student chapter that they put this event together. Aileen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. You're so kind. I appreciate you very much and your students. I value any opportunity to coordinate with you and commend you for the outstanding work that you continue to lead, and always the students that work with you. I'm so impressed. So it is truly my pleasure to be here this afternoon and discuss with you this specific topic that I was asked to present, which is parking, truck parking, specifically in Miami-Dade County and our region. This topic is near and dear to me. In my earlier years in transportation planning, I dealt with a lot of truck freight logistics issues, including one of the first applications in the nation of weigh-in-motion technology being applied to a non-interstate facility, which was used as a model nationwide to address some of the issues that also apply to truck parking, which is land use, availability of land use for these type of freight and logistics needs on our interstate systems. But it is my pleasure. Thank you again. Thank you also to Basia for organizing this. I have Miss Elizabeth Rockwell, who has joined me as well, and she is assisting me with my presentation. Thank you, Elizabeth. She will be changing the screens for me. Elizabeth, why don't we go ahead and jump right into the PowerPoint? My goal is to leave as much time for question and answer. I'm more interested in your comments and your questions. So I'll just take a deep dive on this issue and then go back to you for your questions. So this slide, what I'm doing here is presenting the major issues that we're facing. I know that everyone on this webinar is very familiar with the challenges that we have and also the opportunities we have as it relates to truck parking, but needless to say, the top concern is always availability of parking. We have a significant shortage of truck parking, not only in Miami-Dade County, but in Southeast Florida and also in the state. We are working collectively, not just as a county and a region, but also very closely at the state level to address these shortages. And I'll be discussing some of our strategies with you in a few moments. But I would say that the number one issue besides the availability of land is really the fourth bullet when you're talking about environmental and NIMBY, not in my backyard, but more importantly, the environmental concerns. When you're looking at areas such as ours, such as Miami-Dade County, which is the major metropolitan area, metropolis in the state of Florida, we are the most populous, largest county, most populous county, largest region, largest MPO, TPO in the state of Florida. Availability of land here is a challenge for any type of development, including parking for trucks. And we run into a lot of environmental issues, environmental mitigation, up to and including issues with our wetlands and our water basin. So there are a lot of challenges. The more constrained and the less availability of land, the more challenging the environmental issues can be. Next slide. I just want to give you a history of some of the more recent efforts. We, of course, have been very focused on freight and logistics in South Florida, specifically in Miami-Dade County, for obvious reasons. I'm sure that everyone here knows not just all of the different ports that we have in Florida, of which we're a top in the nation as a state in terms of the amount of seaports that we have and their strategic location from a statewide perspective, but also in Miami-Dade County with Port Miami and Miami International Airport as top cargo, as the top cargo airport in the nation. But so just going back to 2017, I wanted to present a history and present you with a range of different issues that we focus on, everything from short and long-term solutions such as active arterial management strategies, dynamic messaging, interchange improvements. We've also suggested dedicated truck lane only facilities. And of course, amongst all of the other priorities that we look at is the identification of available land for truck parking in all of these areas. We have some currently in progress. One is on hold right now, and we have a freight plan study major update that we're about to launch that I'll be discussing a little later in this presentation as well. Elizabeth, the next slide. So we have certain requirements, federal and state requirements. As I mentioned earlier, we work very closely with the state, but as well as with our federal partners. And in fact, the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization led a partnership with Federal Highway Administration to conduct a regional workshop, freight workshop here, where Federal Highway Administration provided resources to Miami-Dade County, and we led and organized as a region from Palm Beach to Miami-Dade County, including Broward, to get together and talk about our shared challenges and how we're addressing it, and where we learned best practices from other areas of the state that deal with the same issues, that have come up with their own solutions. So that was something recently conducted by TPO. And you can see here our freight plan and our targets and our performance measures that we follow very closely and adopt as required. But really the most concerning is the last bullet, where you can see the direction of our truck travel time reliability is not quite headed in the right direction. It is increasing on an annual basis. And while the state of Florida is below the threshold, Miami-Dade County is above it and continuing that trend. So that is concerning. And of course, the availability of truck parking is a challenge that perhaps could be viewed as one potential solution in recapturing our truck travel time reliability. If we have available facilities and truck parking here in South Florida, perhaps the travel time reliability could stabilize, though that is not the only solution, but there has been some discussion of that at the FTAC committee of the MPO. Next slide. I really like this project. It's really our gateway feature of new truck parking in South Florida. This particular project is very near and dear to me because I worked on the environmental documents while I was with the Florida Department of Transportation as the PLEMO administrator. I worked on the early concept development on looking at this triangle and on all the different iterations of how truck parking could be accommodated. And I'm very proud to partner with the state now as a TPO to see the completion of this project. It's about 135 truck parking spaces. There are amenities here for the trucks. That was critical for us. And this location is not only critical, but I mean, it's been described by many as the ultimate spaghetti bowl of interchange access, but having a truck parking facility in the center of it is key. And it's a really major accomplishment for us here in Miami-Dade County. Though it doesn't come close to alleviating the parking shortage we have, it is a step in the right direction. Next slide. I would like to acknowledge the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee, FTAC, in particular, the chairman of this committee, Mr. Juan Flores, who took time to join us here today. I would like to maybe give him the floor for a minute on any comments he may have, but just to share with the group in general and all of your esteemed esteemed students that are joining this webinar, Dr. Kaiser. I'm really proud of this committee. This is the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization was the first to suggest, not only suggest, but create this type of committee as part of the formal metropolitan planning process. And as a result of our efforts, many other MPOs in the state have followed this model and also have FTAC. So I'm very proud of this committee. And I wonder if Mr. Flores can just share 30 seconds about a recent field trip that they just conducted and led along with Beacon Council, the world's largest indoor aquaculture facility in the world, located right here in Homestead, Florida, which is a fish farm, if you will, and has about 10,000 tons of salmon a year that's processed there. Mr. Flores, if you'd like to mention or share a few comments with all of us on the role of the FTAC, I'd be pleased. Thank you.
Well, Aileen, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to say anything, but I just want to commend you for your leadership. You've been doing a great job at the TPO. You know, for the folks that don't know, and I see a lot of friendly faces or tag bars here, but many of you don't know that this is one of the few TPOs that actually has a freight committee. So I think that's says a lot about our community and our partners, you know, north of us as well in Broward. But, you know, there's been a lot of success over the past several years, not just on the trucking, but the whole intermodal component, the trucking, the rail, the ports, and also to the state DOT, who has been a great partner in all of this. It's one of the few DOTs, I think, that has really led the way. And of course, the loved and adored Carlos Castro too. I think we have to give him props too, just for what he has done. And I also see a couple of freight coordinators out there too, and Mr. Upchurch, who also led that component on the northern part. So with that, Aileen, thank you for the acknowledgement, and thank you for what you're doing, because it's good times right now in Miami-Dade County.
Well, thank you, Chairman Flores, for coming on and participating, for your comments. We value FTAC greatly, and without FTAC, really, we would be lacking in a lot of resources and input from directly from the industry. So the members of our FTAC are industry representatives. They're experts in their own right, and they're here to advise us on the needs of the freight industry and guide us so that efforts such as the long-range transportation plan include the type of improvements needed on freight and logistics. So that brings me to my next slide, which of course, all of us here on this webinar are familiar, not just in the state with the strategic, as I said earlier, the strategic locations of our various ports, but focusing more on Miami-Dade County and why freight and logistics is such a critical component of what we do, and why it's central and a core part of our priorities are simply because Miami International Airport and Port Miami are located in Miami-Dade County. As you know, Port Miami is the #1 passenger port cruise terminal in the world. It's recognized all over as the cruise capital of the world and gateway to the Americas. It contributes $43 billion annually here to our local economy, but beyond that, to the state, as well as Miami International Airport and its cargo activities, and the tremendous impact of being an economic engine to Miami-Dade County and the region and the state. So our freight logistics are of critical concern to us, our truck parking, and addressing all of the challenges beyond that, such as workforce availability, training. All of this is something that we keep our eye very, very close on here. Next slide. And that leads me to our current efforts. As many of you know, I'm preaching to the choir. Each student here is very familiar and has probably studied and can probably share more with me than I can with you about some of the shifts that have occurred pre and post pandemic on our freight logistics chain, not just the shifts, not just the current challenges that we're facing globally, but the shift at the core base of the consumer and how they're conducting their everyday search for basic needs, and the type and level of freight that is being, has entered the marketplace has really changed the way we look at how freight and logistics operate. It's no longer just the mainstream freight and logistics operations that we have been focused on, but now the demand and increase on your everyday Amazon type delivery and freight reliance that we now need to look at from a network perspective. This is something we're very focused on. We're about to initiate a new major update to our freight plan this year. It will be concluded next year. That will feed into our long-range transportation plan. And we work very closely with our partners and recently hosted a Miami-Dade Ports and Economic Forum session in our Smart Trends Transportation Summit. And we work very closely to help promote and sponsor needs, not just in Miami-Dade County, but regionally and statewide for any and all funds that are available federally at the federal level now to make sure that Florida is getting its fair share and beyond to continue the level of investments that we need here. So I'm very proud of our efforts on being one of the first TPOs in the state to jump on board with a formal evaluation and study of post-COVID freight logistic movements and network needs, which is currently in progress. And at this time, I'm really going to turn it over to you, Vasya, and see if you would like to have some more discussion on any of these topics or any specific questions from yourself and or your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aileen. It was a very interesting presentation. If you have any questions, you can either unmute yourself or you can type them on the chat and I can read the question. So far, I don't see any questions in the chat. If anyone would like to unmute himself or herself.
Vasya, while we're waiting for questions, I'll just read off some fun and interesting statistics so we can allow some time for questions. So as a percentage wise, statewide, as I'm sure most of you know, as students of freight and logistics, that the state of Florida has a disparity in our percentage of cargo that's entering the state versus leaving the state. So the percentage of empty trucks leaving the state ranges between 30 and 50% depending on the corridor. Here in South Florida, deep south, in the south, we have a much larger disparity. Our trucks leaving South Florida are 51% empty versus entering South Florida 20% empty. So we have capacity here. A network is one part of addressing that, and there are other parts, economically speaking, that are a part of addressing how we could capture some of that capacity as far as freight movement in Florida. But those are some statistics. In coming more closer to Florida Atlantic University, the more north you travel, the better the statistics look. You pick up a little bit more cargo as you're entering, exiting different areas of the state to the west. And so, of course, being the closer you get to Jacksonville, which is a major freight hub for rail cargo, is really where your statistics take on more meaningful balance. But that's just some from the truck industry perspective.
Great. I think Andrew has a question. Andrew, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Aileen, my name is Andrew Dresco. I work for the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And I just wanted to thank you for presenting on this issue here today. This is something that is very important to a lot of MPOs across the country. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on some of the major strategies that the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization is working on to address truck parking. I saw in your slides that you did actually facilitate and work on a public investment in truck parking. Are there other things that you're doing to sort of address this issue at a regional level?
Oh, thank you for that question, Andrew. I'd like to give a shout out in case you might know my colleague, Chris Roy in Minnesota DOT. Please tell him I send my regards.
Yes, I do. Yep.
Oh, please let him know Aileen Bouclé sends her regards, and I'm always happy to coordinate with Minnesota on these issues. And if you would like to do a follow-up discussion, I would be pleased to do so. But I can tell you that the state of Florida has favorable legislation when it comes to public-private partnerships. And we are very much engaged and very, very active in looking at private sector participation, private. In fact, the first picture that I showed, and I wonder if Elizabeth could put on the very first slide from my PowerPoint, was a privately owned 51-acre truck parking facility. It's national truck parking. It holds 1,300 trucks. And I think that our private sector is a large part of it should be and are included in our efforts in finding and identifying solutions. But the very first slide, Elizabeth, if you're able to get to it, is an example of a private entity, a privately. Next slide, the next slide after that is just that one. Nope, go right there. So, I mean, but this isn't just for Florida, this is everywhere. So, you know, identifying land, and I can tell you that we start off like anybody else. We want to look at publicly owned lands, availability of land first, whether it's owned by FDOT or the county or another state facility. Any availability of land that's already publicly held that could be reutilized for truck parking is always a tier 1 level effort. I'm not going to say that that makes it any easier. In fact, it does not. Sometimes the land is banked for environmental issues and cannot be used. Other times its use is not compatible because of a future use or some other need for that land. And other times the location, though it's a publicly owned land, is just not conducive for truck parking because of where it's located in relation to your network. But reaching out and having, you know, engaging your private sector partners as part of the solution has to be a part of the process. Andrew, what incentives can we offer? How can we facilitate this type of investment in our network? And I think having a dedicated committee as part of your metropolitan planning process, such as what we have, the Freight Advisory Committee, Transportation Advisory Committee, is part of an effort that we undertake to make sure we're engaging our private sector partners, not just understanding what their problems and challenges are, but also opportunities that might be out there. And it's not easy for us here, Andrew. As I said, we're the largest metropolis in the state of Florida, and land is scarce for any type of development that you're looking at because of the needs of our commercial and residential land, and the zoning for that. Our opportunities for truck parking are quite challenging. Looking at inland ports, Andrew, is something that can be helpful as well. Do you have plans for that for your airport or seaport, inland port operations? And if so, making sure that the planning of that includes consideration for truck parking will be very helpful in moving the dial there. And those are just things that come to mind. But as I mentioned, I'd be happy to follow up with you and Chris on more discussion and details, maybe share some of our documents on arterial management strategies, dynamic messaging, things that we're doing here to try to route trucks to parking wherever we can find it. I hope that was helpful, Andrew.
I really appreciate your responses. As we work with our own MPOs, they are not nearly as involved on issues pertaining to freight or truck parking. And so it's good to see sort of a comparison about how other MPOs are being involved in integrating this into their daily work. So thank you for that.
Well, Andrew, I will say that I've not had the pleasure of working with my counterpart MPO in Minnesota, and I would be happy to do so, but please know that it is a core federal requirement. So I assure you they are doing this and they are working on their freight and logistics. It just may be in a different form because of the needs that you have over there, Andrew. We have the top ports in the state of Florida right here in Miami-Dade County. It demands a dedicated time and energy and investment that we dedicate to it because of the critical importance. And in many ways, you can say we're either the end or the beginning of the line of freight here in the continental US, certainly in the state of Florida because of our geography. So we would both be following whatever federal requirements we have, but we may be going about it in different ways. And sharing best practices is always something that we're happy to do. And like I said, it was a pleasure to meet you, Andrew, and I would love to, again, follow up with you separately and maybe drill down on some of these issues and get your MPO on board and maybe do some best practice exchange in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Aileen. Do we have any further questions? I don't see any questions on the chat. You can either unmute yourself or type them in the chat. Yes, Carlos, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation, Aileen. My question is, as you mentioned, you are part of a very developed county as well as the metropolitan area. Are you coordinating, how is the coordination with surrounding counties that may have better land use availability, land use around the transportation facilities as well as available land? Is that something that you are doing? Ideally, you would want to resolve issues within your county, but you know, is that something that you are looking into?
Right. To answer your question directly, and thank you for your question, the answer is yes, we are coordinating, and I'll be a little bit more specific about that. We are actually a national best practice with Federal Highway Administration for our regional coordination. We have entered into a regional memorandum of understanding voluntarily and have executed an MOU by the 3 largest MPOs in the state of Florida collectively have come together and formed a regional transportation council. And we look at these issues regionally. And in fact, we are currently advocating, considering one of 2 possible new inland port locations for our own Port Miami, one located in Miami-Dade County, one located outside Miami-Dade County, but within the region, which we are working collectively and collaboratively as a region, which we will come together as a region and support once that selection is made. And it's being, of course, driven in a data-driven process based on the strategic location of its operations for the county and the region, as far as addressing the issues that we've discussed here today. So we do work collaboratively. We actually collectively fund, again, by we voluntarily set aside funds in our Unified Planning Work Program and work very closely with Federal Highway Administration to include this in our Unified Planning Work Program to collectively fund a regional transportation plan. And we rotate this responsibility amongst the region. Right now, Miami-Dade County Transportation Planning Organization is the lead agency and has kicked off the development of the regional transportation model and the regional transportation plan. And we coordinate our freight issues very closely in this plan, and that it also informs and feeds into our local long-range transportation plans as well. You know, the challenges, the only other thing that I would offer to your question, Carlos, is that unfortunately for us, the availability of land and the issues that we face here in Miami-Dade County don't change too much once you leave Miami-Dade County and head north into Broward and even into Palm Beach. We continue to have these challenges, although the more north you go, the more opportunities you can find. Still, as a region of which we're in the top 10 most populous regions nationally, we still struggle with a lot of these core challenges of availability of land and environmental impacts for this type of land use. I hope that was helpful, Carlos. And if I addressed your question, if you had any other follow-up on that, I'd be happy to discuss it with you.
Oh, that was great. Thank you for that. Yes, it certainly makes sense. And yeah, it's unfortunate that the land use has become such a challenge. And of course, if the further north you go, more problems you have with the requirements, the hours of service and other issues. No, so you cannot go too far from Miami-Dade, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Miss Aileen. John, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, I'm John Dahm. I'm the vice chair of the FTAC committee in Miami with Juan, and I see Kevin on the line and Mike Silver as well. I'm also the chairman of the Florida Freight Advisory Committee, active in a number of freight studies and truck parking studies here in Miami-Dade County. A few of the sites that make the most sense that are probably worth talking about for a couple of minutes would be state-owned sites. The trustees of the Internal Improvement Trust of Florida, TIITF, hold over 100 acres along Okeechobee Road over by the site that you showed before, the 51 acres. It's low, so it would require some fill, et cetera, but it is owned by the state of Florida. Also, the Bouclé Airport West. I know that's been somewhat contentious because a couple of other plans have been proposed for it. What makes it extraordinary is it's on the National Highway Freight Transportation Network, which would open it up to federal funding through the state of Florida or other sources. That would also be attractive to work regionally with the Miami-Dade TPO and the Broward MPO, because both Port Everglades and Port Miami really need a location for a nearby inland port. Another one, of course, is in Broward County, although it looks like it's in Miami-Dade. That's the Nike missile site. A lot of people don't know it exists, but it's on the south side of the Heft, the Homestead extension of the Florida Turnpike. It's about 400 acres divided into two major parcels. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson has pledged her support to us on that if we tell her what we need. It doesn't have a turnpike exit right there, but it could be worked out off of the Red Road exit, 57th Avenue. So between those, we really have a lot of acreage. It's close to 1,000 acres. Not that you'd want to put everything on any one spot, but there's a lot of state-owned, county-owned, and federally owned land in that area up in Northwest Miami-Dade County. Otherwise, we get down into the south area with the area that was cut out of the comprehensive Miami-Dade master plan, down just north of that section that they want to try and bring the 792 acres into the urban development boundary for the development of an industrial park. That land is just north, though, of 248th Street. The trouble with that and the land that has the 51 acres and that whole section really up in the northwest quadrant of the Heft and Okeechobee Road is that they don't allow services. It's outside the UDB, so it makes it a little difficult to do very much with it in terms of what the truck drivers and operators really need. What they want most of all is a place that they can park, that it's safe, they can have services, and a lot of them want to do some repairs on their trucks. That's really tough outside the UDB. I'm not sure where we can go with it, but those are issues we've run into. There's an awful lot more that could be said about it. One thing, though, is the two ports seem to be willing to work together. We have a relatively new director at Port Everglades and a new director at Port Miami. And when I asked them both at the event last Friday, put on by the World City Group, whether they would be willing to work together on an inland port, they both agreed they would. So that's some progress. Maybe we could look up near Lake Okeechobee, a little north, someplace that we could bring empty containers that could even work as an external port. Just one more thing I'll say. When we look at port cities, Atlanta likes to consider itself the port city for Savannah, but it's 230 miles away. if you go 230 miles out of Miami, you're pretty much through the state of Florida. You really, we could make inland ports at a lot of places. So right at the Dade-Broward line would be an obvious place to work with our own government-owned land. But another place would be just going a little bit interior with Port Everglades. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I think John really is an example of why we are able to be as successful as we have been because of our experts such as John, who dedicate their time to participating and being an active member and leading their leadership role on our FTAC, our committee, and locally and at the state level. Thank you very much, John. He's an expert and his contributions are critical. And yes, I agree with you, John. The level of cooperation and partnership that we have in South Florida is a national best practice. It is a national example. We, my counterpart at Broward MPO, myself and Palm Beach are often asked to join FHWA in webinars and talk about our memorandum of understanding and how we view ourselves regionally. And we are looking at these inland ports beyond Miami-Dade County. We're looking at this seamlessly as a region. And I think I agree with you. We have opportunities here, but also challenges. And, you know, we being a large metropolitan area, there are even other challenges we haven't talked about today that come into play at any time we suggest this type of land use. But everyone on this call will experiences this as well, maybe not at the same degrees that we do, but I appreciate your participation. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Ms. Aileen. Do we have any other questions for Ms. Aileen? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask a question. So, as you already know, Florida needs to overcome weather disruption, especially during the summer period, such as hurricanes, for example. So drivers during these periods are facing with parking shortages. I would like to hear your opinion of utilizing alternative parking locations, such as parking of gas stations or supermarkets that could be utilized under these emergency situations.
Excellent question, Basia. I think everything needs to be on the table. I would be very supportive of that. And I think what we're talking about here, again, is involving private sector partners at the table, because some of these land uses you've mentioned are privately owned, private investments. And could they be utilized? Could they be used in these kind of situations? The answer is yes. It involves partnership on sitting down at the table. I find over and over again that our private sector are really a critical part of any solution. But I like your thinking on this. I'm very supportive of your thinking of this. And it's not unlike what we're currently doing on the floor on the national interstate system, where we are providing signage in exchange for amenities that drivers need along the interstate to stop for gas and rest stops, where we're not having to invest in those type of development within the interstate, but allow private sector to provide that on the off-ramp of the interstate in exchange for free advertisement of the signage on the interstate. I think we have a model already in use for that. Could it be in the use that you've suggested? Probably. And if, you know, that's something I think we should look at.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aileen.
Thank you, Gracia.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
I'd also like to recognize Kevin. Kevin is on, I believe, and I'm sorry because I cannot see everyone that's here. And I'm trying to, Kevin Welford is on. If you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group. He is our FTAC coordinator and leads the effort on all our freight and logistics. And I just want to recognize him today on this webinar.
Yes, thank you, Aileen. I turn my camera on, so maybe you'll spot me out of all the names.
I see you. Yes, thank you, Kevin.
Yes, it's Kevin Walford, the transportation planner here for the TPO, and One of the areas in which I concentrate on is freight transportation, and I work a lot with several of the professionals here on this meeting who have already spoken, such as John and Juan and such. And I'm very glad that we were able to do this presentation, the TPO, Aileen, Elizabeth, and myself, to you all here at FAU.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Miss Aileen, for your very interesting presentation and this very informative conversation. Do we have any other questions before we end up this session?
I do have a brief question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So how realistic is it to you to maybe utilize, and I know this was more on the private sector's part, but at some point trucking will be autonomous, or at the very least, they're pushing for that. When that does happen, would autonomous trucking solve the issue of parking, since these vehicles would be able to operate for longer periods of time that don't need human beings to operate them? So my question is, do you guys have a framework to facilitate that, or is that something that's not near the horizon yet, that's not realistic to be able to solve this current issue of truck parking?
Oh, so we don't have a near-term solution to answer you directly, Alan. Thank you for your question. I'm a huge supporter of all new and emerging technologies being assessed and integrated into the network. And I think that it's applicable what your point regarding solving parking. But for me, the larger question is, how do we even begin to handle autonomous platooning fleets of freight trucks on our interstates at the exit ramps? Because I feel that the autonomous vehicle technology will take us only as far as the exit ramp, because the real capacity and challenge issues and the investment in your network has to take place at your local network. And how are you facilitating the movement of these platooning freight? So I do not believe that the existing capacity that is available today on the interstate can be managed fully at the local network level, and the kind of investments that we look at have to now pivot from parking to facilitating this movement at the local grid to and from the port or destination that it's traveling. So I think that autonomous technology is a huge advancement for us from all aspects, primarily even safety. But I don't believe we are at a point where we have near-term investments set up and solutions set up to be on the receiving end of this technology well beyond parking. And those would be my thoughts at this point on that.
Yeah, that's very true, because obviously you want these trucks to be able to distribute their goods at the local level, right? And you know that right there would require human intervention, because at this very moment they're not capable. Autonomous vehicles aren't capable of doing it. I'm sure at some point, right? But not in the near future, like you said. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate your question.
Thank you. John has a question, I think. John, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just going to mention about the autonomous vehicles. The 27 corridor is probably does double duty for that, being a part of the National Highway Freight Transportation Network. And it's also one of the few routes that's been designated by the state of Florida as a possible proving ground, besides the SunTrax facility up in North Florida, to run some of the autonomous vehicles. But, you know, there has to be a place to transfer them from being autonomous to driver operated. And I think any of those sites along 27 would maybe be worthwhile. One other thing that might be worth mentioning is that a lot of the drivers in South Florida, unlike other places, drive rigs that they have to park at night. They actually live here, and most of them live in populated parts of the South Florida region. One of the things that was suggested, and I don't know if it was ever followed up on, is to find out where the commercial driver's license holders actually live, that they're the constituents of our elected officials. They're also the neighbors of, most of the people all over Miami-Dade County. And frankly, you know a lot more about a truck driver than you do about the person in the van picking up their kid at school next to yours. We know almost everything about that person that's driving the truck. And they publicize their name, their address, often on the door of the truck. So they're really very safe people. I think something that's important is to take a look at where they live, where they need to park their rigs at night, because those are locations that don't necessarily require services. And they may be worth a carve out, just like we did for the CMDP in the Northwest Miami-Dade area and in the Southwest area, just as a quick thought. Thank you.
And that's an excellent comment, John. Again, you're an expert on this. I appreciate your input on this. And I think the challenges that we're highlighting here are that often there are local ordinances prohibiting the overnight parking of these trucks right where our drivers live. And those ordinances exist for other reasons well beyond the discussion we're having here today, but these are not only, this is not uncommon, just for Miami-Dade County. This is all over. And I think it should be looked at. I do agree with your comments, and it is a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ms. Aileen. I think we have time for one more question. So Jolene, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I guess I can turn on my camera. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I'm sorry for popping on a little bit late, but really, I work in Southern California mostly, but I do freight work all over. So seeing what you're doing, we're always watching, and we just opened a Florida office a couple of years ago. But my question has to do kind of along the same lines that John brought up, which I thought was great to hear that they're really looking at this issue for the locals and their overnight truck parking. But I was curious, one of the other things that we've seen a lot of emphasis on lately is the equity issue for the long haul drivers, safety issues. I know this is something FMCSA is really concerned about, especially with women drivers. We're seeing an influx of them. So when we're looking at these solutions, I'm just curious, I've been asking a lot of people across the country how we're considering those safety issues with specific sources or types of drivers that we're seeing.
Thank you, Jolene. Can I ask what city you're from in California?
I am in Oceanside, but I worked for the Port of Long Beach for about 6 years before going private industry. So I've been based in basically that Southern California area for quite some time.
Are you part of the San Diego COG, or I'm just trying to place my counterpart? You don't have to share if you don't want to, because they do. I really admire a lot of the advances and strides that have been made by my counterparts on the West Coast as well. And we often meet for best challenges, for best practices. But I can tell you that safety is always a consideration. It's on the forefront. Well before the other issues that you mentioned, which are of prime focus and priority to our MPO. But safety has always been at the front of this issue and at the table on any and all overnight parking considerations, and even more so now based on your comments, which we're all very aware of. So I cannot address the specifics of that with you, other than that is a consideration upfront anytime these facilities are being planned. And there's a lot of advances in addressing these issues, also from a technology perspective, that we want to make sure get integrated into our plans when we're doing this. And I would be happy to have more of an offline discussion. Is safety issues and how we address them or something that we would maybe to discuss more at a summary level here, and the details of that might be more left to those involved in security and maybe not as widely shared. So, and then if I'm able to know which cog you're in, I might be able to help you a little bit more with some more details on plans that are going on in our area and your area as well.
I'm with Fair and Pierce, so I'm a consultant, but I'm currently doing some work for Sandag.
Sandag.
Yeah.
Hi.
So it's
Hi.
very
Me
rough.
too.
Thinking of, we're really focused right now on the electric vehicle charging or hydrogen fueling for heavy duty trucks.
Excellent.
Right now.
Well, my counterpart over there, Hassan, does phenomenal work. He would probably anything that you see in the industry that's out there, the latest and greatest on dealing with safety and security and equity, please, Hassan and I would be very happy to listen to you and see what we could do to make sure that these concepts are being involved in future planning efforts.
So Aileen, are you referring to Hassan Ikrati?
At Sandag.
Yes, formerly of SCAG.
Yes, that's correct. He does great work. He did it in LA and he's doing it in did you know San Diego is our sister TPO MPO city? We're both single county MPOs and we have the same, relatively speaking, the same population. We're 2.8 million, you're 3 million. We're both geographically off of the coast and we face a lot of the same issues. So these are issues we both, Hassan and I both share and actively working on.
Yeah, certainly with your ports. I mean, you have the Port of Miami competing with all the residential and recreational uses of the waterfront. So yes, very similar. I could see that. Awesome. That's great.
Thank you,
I'm
Julie.
happy to speak with both of you about this issue though.
I look forward to it.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent points, by the way. Thank you, Jolene.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Ms. Aileen, for this very interesting presentation and conversation. It was our pleasure having you with us today. We are looking forward for our next webinar, and you will soon receive more information about that. Thank you all for your participation, and once again, Ms. Aileen, thank you so much.
Thank you again. And Dr. Kaiser, it's always a pleasure. And I look forward to following up with you as well, Vasia. Thank you for organizing this event.